The bombing of Pearl Harbor may be a day of infamy for a generation of Americans. But for Japanese Americans of that era, there's another day that shoulders just as much shame. On February 19, 1942, 10 weeks after that attack, President Franklin Roosevelt showed the status of our anti-Asian sentiment by signing Executive Order 9066. That order authorized the military to round up Japanese Americans living along the West Coast, remove them from their homes, force them to abandon their businesses, and leave behind everything but what they could carry. A brutality based on their ethnicity.
The justification for the incarceration orders was that Japanese Americans were committing acts of espionage. The truth of the matter is that the military, through the help of the Federal Communications Commission, realized pretty quickly that none of that was true.
Still, beginning that March, the War Relocation Authority would send more than 120,000 people to 10 remote camps scattered from California to Arkansas, including to one here in Idaho. On August 10, 1942, the Minidoka internment camp opened, unfinished. Today, the story of the camp shares the same status, as the impacts of that prejudicial imprisonment are still being felt generations later. The Minidoka internment camp opened 80 years ago today, and as you heard, a lot of it was unfinished when thousands of Japanese Americans arrived. With most of them coming from the lush coastal areas around the Northwest, you can imagine the shock of showing up to this dry, dusty destination in Jerome County, Idaho, and told this is where they would live for the duration of the war. Not only that, they had to help finish and build their own confinement, finish the barracks, the other buildings, figure out how to grow food. 80 years later, most of the 13,000 Japanese Americans who spent time there are no longer with us. But their stories are being kept alive through the Minidoka Pilgrimage Committee, a group who tries to make regular trips to what is now a National Historic Site in Hunt, Idaho, operated by the National Park Service. Well, that group made another trip this summer, and we were fortunate enough to tag along to try to grasp the full magnitude of this day in Idaho history. It's the first sight you see at the west entrance, much like those who arrived 80 years ago, to what was then called the Minidoka Relocation Center. The guard tower, one of 8 that once watched over the property. Then the lava rock guardhouse.
Kind of bar that would have been here, right? And a gate.
Which controlled who came in.
And a check-in point.
And who came out. And keeping them in, the barbed wire. Wrapping the perimeter, a fence which wouldn't be in place until months after people moved in. You can see why Relocation Center would be renamed and better known as Incarceration Camp.
So if you want to come a little bit closer, I want to re-welcome everybody here to Minidoka National Historic Site.
Kurt Ikeda is the Director of Interpretation and Education at Minidoka.
120,000 people of Japanese ancestry were incarcerated during World War II.
Kurt's job is to explain how Japanese Americans,
over 13,000 who were incarcerated here at Minidoka during the 3 years of operation,
forced to live here.
The majority being from the Pacific Northwest, Seattleites, Portlanders, 135 folks from Alaska.
Transformed 33,000 dusty, desolate, high desert acres into fertile farmland with more than 640 buildings.
Packed, 40 feet in between these barracks, 40 feet, 40 feet, 40 feet.
A self-sustained city, sort of.
The water systems were not ready until October here, 2 months after construction.
That in 1943 would have been Idaho's 7th largest. Today,
we have Block 19 right over here on this map showing you kind of how far Minidoka was.
The National Historic Site is reduced to just 73 acres, with only 6 original buildings.
To my right-hand side, the root cellar, which we'll walk to.
Along with divulging dramatic numbers.
A 20 by 120 size barrack would have been where our families were incarcerated.
Kurt likes to ask how many of his visitors are here for the first time.
You said Block 42. Can I ask you why that specific block?
Oh, that's where my family was.
This group, though, they've been here before.
This would be Barrack 1 right here. That was my home.
Yep, yeah, Barrack 1 right over here. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Eugene Tagawa arrived in 1942 with his parents and 2 older sisters.
I was born in June of that year, so I was, like 3 months old when I came here. My younger brother was born here.
Eugene was too young to remember much about his time at camp,
and we'll go into enter the barracks.
but that's why he keeps coming back.
Oh, absolutely. Every time is a new experience because the people are different.
Since 2009, Eugene has been part of the Minidoka Pilgrimage Committee,
Dozo.
a group formed nearly 20 years ago to bring together family and friends of former incarcerees back to these barracks.
I encourage you to find a place on the wall that feels appropriate to kind of lay your hand on and
Pre-pandemic, these pilgrimages would boast more than 300 plus people
to feel history.
to not only see the conditions they faced,
There was a single light bulb, a potbelly stove, army cots with wool blankets, and as you all know the phrase, only what we could carry.
but to honor that generation
Is there a certain just kind of phrase, a feeling that you get standing aside here today?
who had their rights and livelihoods more than just relocated.
Family, connection, healing.
I could feel that. I could feel that in your voice. I could feel that in this space.
Eugene has been back about a dozen times, and it's all still as fresh as the first.
The first time I came on the pilgrimage, I met this man that I'd known when I was in junior high school as a church leader. And he looked at my name tag and he said, "Oh, I know this name." And I said, "Yeah, Howard, I went to a Faith Bible church when I was in junior high school." He said, "No, I know your father." He said, "I played baseball with your father in camp." And then he told me some stories about my father that I never knew. I didn't know my father played baseball in camp. So that was my first pilgrimage. And I said, whoa, what a gift, right? Yeah. So I kept coming back.
And why Eugene is so encouraged to see the younger generations alongside.
Well, the barracks are just the most intimate spaces, right, that were in these concentration camps.
Aaron Shigaki's family spent nearly 3.5 years at Minidoka.
I guess I can just feel the energy, and I just think about my family and the things that they endured.
Her grandfather's bitterness led them to being one of the last to leave.
He was just so angry the whole time, and he was one of those guys who was like, we leave when they kick us out.
It's that strength of character Aaron wanted to commemorate when she joined the Pilgrimage Committee almost 10 years ago.
You know, I also realized that I didn't know a thing. You know, there was like a paragraph in my 8th grade Washington State history book.
When we think about Minidoka, we think about dust, we think about lack of privacy.
Oh, there's certainly a lot to learn about Minidoka,
Lines for everything.
but maybe there's a lot more to learn from Minidoka.
45 cents per person per day in 1942 was the amount of money spent per person.
I want them to learn the whole story about how a whole community and people were unconstitutionally, unjustly incarcerated because of their race. And I want people to understand that to a certain degree, it's still happening now. I don't think as a country we've fully grappled with it. I know as a community we're not done grappling with it. When these truths can really become part of the American narrative, we're going to be better for it. I really believe that. But we have to tell it all, you know?
Telling it all includes what they endeavored for distraction. There was music and dancing, stage shows and swimming holes. And they played sports like golf and basketball. And of course,
it was
baseball.
one of the only pastimes out here, one of the only distractions from their reality, which was just being out here in this desolate place with nothing around them. And they were just able to forget their situation just for a little bit.
Johnny Narita only knew about Minidoka through family chatter.
Growing up, you always hear about camp. I guess at some point my family kind of gave me the rundown of what it was, what happened, the gravity of it all. And it never really sunk in until I came out here.
In 2016, Johnny joined his grandpa, George Nakagawa, a former player for the Hunt team, for the dedication of the baseball field.
This place has a certain power to it. It's like a place of great trauma and pain, and it's also a place of healing.
Part of that healing happened right here on this field.
And so they honored my grandpa and the other baseball players, and we played catch for a bit. And I think I ran around the bases. Yeah, I'm never gonna forget that. Yeah.
George left his ball and glove to the Minidoka Museum. But when he died a year later, he left something more for his grandson.
It's our legacy, for better or for worse. It's a part of American history and our history that we can't erase, and we shouldn't try to erase it.
For the 13,000 people of Japanese,
Which is what the Minidoka Pilgrimage Committee is really all about.
and this ball field was built as a community effort. Minidoka will always be a community-centered historic site.
Most of the buildings may be gone or coming apart, but to keep them from fading from history or from memory will be about keeping connected
Oh, the raw egg. Oh yeah, tamago kake.
those
Yeah.
who are already connected.
We are here together now, and we get to reclaim this story. We get to reclaim this place and remember it for what it is, which is a terrible place.
To keep the Minidoka story in clear focus.
It's about remembering this, not forgetting, and just saying never again.
There's one other thing you will notice as you enter the Minidoka Historical Site. It's on the left. There's a 3-panel wooden sign, has an eagle attached to the top. It's called simply the Honor Roll, and it lists the names of the young men and women from the camp who served in the military while their families remained incarcerated. Just think about that. They weren't considered American enough to stay in their homes, but they were American enough to be sent to the front lines of the war. There are nearly 1,000 names on that honor roll. 418 when that sign was first put up just after the camp was opened in 1943, and it was in full view of the guards who were watching over them at the gate. Minidoka had the highest percentage of prisoners serving in the military, by the way. And when the war was over and the incarcerees were allowed to go home, if they had one left, well, most of those 33,000 acres of the camp, they were then offered to returning veterans to farm.